Hollywood, a word that evokes golden spotlights, red carpets, and a time when movie stars seemed larger than life. From the 1930s to the 1950s, the golden age of Hollywood created not just films but myths, shining illusions of perfection projected on the silver screen. The studios controlled everything: the images of their stars, the stories that reached the press, and even the way audiences were allowed to see love, desire, or conflict. To the public eye, Hollywood was glamorous, refined, and untouchable. But behind the shimmering curtain of elegance, there were cracks in the facade. Some women, some daring, scandalous women, refused to fit the mold of the pristine, obedient starlet. They were not content to play only the sweet ingenue, the quiet wife, or the angelic beauty. They spoke too loudly, drank too heavily, loved too freely, and most shockingly of all, lived unapologetically. In the polite language of the time, society called them vulgar. It was a word meant to shame, a word meant to keep women in line. To be vulgar meant you laughed too loudly, wore clothes that were too provocative, told jokes that were too daring. It meant you embraced sexuality when you were supposed to hide it. It meant you spoke the truth when the world demanded silence. And in Hollywood, where the production code dictated what could and could not be seen on screen, being labeled vulgar was a direct challenge to the system. Yet for these actresses, vulgarity was not weakness. It was power. It was a weapon against hypocrisy. It was a refusal to be controlled by men, studios, or society. And in being labeled vulgar, they became unforgettable. Take Mae West, for example, the queen of innuendo. She made America laugh at sex when everyone was told not to talk about it. She strutted onto the screen with confidence that mocked the very idea of shame. To her critics she was indecent, outrageous. To audiences she was a revelation. Or Tallulah Bankhead, the aristocratic rebel who burned through Broadway and Hollywood with a whiskey glass in one hand and a cigarette in the other. She spoke openly about her lovers, both men and women, in an age when doing so could ruin careers. She was loud, fearless, and delightfully scandalous. Then there was Ava Gardner, the sultry beauty who Hollywood tried to tame, but who lived her life on her own terms. She drank, she fought, she loved with a ferocity that scared the gossip columnists, but only made her allure stronger. And Bette Davis, the actress who didn't need to curse or flaunt sexuality to be called vulgar. For her, the label came simply from refusing to play nice. Her sharp tongue, her biting honesty, and her refusal to be silenced made her both feared and respected. And finally Marlene Dietrich, the German-born siren who wore tuxedos, kissed women on screen, and turned gender norms upside down. She embodied a kind of decadence that American censors considered dangerous. But her style, her audacity, and her refusal to apologize made her an icon for generations to come. These women were not vulgar in truth. They were bold. They were unafraid. They lived in a world that wanted them to stay quiet, and instead they made noise. They terrified the studios, rattled the censors, and in doing so, they carved out a place in history that no polished, obedient starlet could ever achieve. This is not just the story of movie stars. It is the story of rebels in gowns and diamonds. It is the story of women who risked everything by refusing to conform. It is the story of Hollywood's golden age. Glamorous on the surface, but underneath, pulsing with scandal, rebellion, and unapologetic fire. So, step back in time with us, to an era of glittering premieres and velvet ropes, when to be vulgar was the ultimate act of defiance. These are the golden age actresses who refused to be silenced. These are the women who were called vulgar. When Mae West walked onto a stage, or later onto a movie screen, audiences knew exactly what they were in for. They weren't going to see a shy, modest girl next door. They were going to see a woman who owned her body, her wit, and her power. Mae West didn't just play characters who were brash and sexually confident. She was that woman in real life. And in the buttoned-up world of early 20th century America, that made her dangerous. Born in Brooklyn in 1893, Mae West grew up performing in vaudeville, but it was on Broadway where she made her mark. In 1926, she wrote, produced, and starred in a play simply titled Sex. The name alone was scandalous. Audiences were shocked, critics were appalled, and moral crusaders demanded it be shut down. But the play ran for nearly a year, making Mae West a household name. Then came the police raid. In April 1927, West and her cast were arrested on obscenity charges. Mae was sentenced to 10 days in jail on Welfare Island. Most performers would have been ruined by such a scandal. But West, she turned it into free publicity. The newspapers couldn't get enough of her. She joked about the experience, claiming the police had given her a royal escort to prison. She even quipped that she wore silk underwear beneath her prison uniform, just to maintain her glamour. For Mae West, vulgarity wasn't something to hide from. It was something to embrace. And she understood something few in show business did at the time. Scandal sells. By the early 1930s, Hollywood was searching for fresh stars. The talkies had replaced silent films, and audiences wanted new voices, new energy. Paramount Pictures took a gamble and brought Mae West to the screen. Her first big hit came in 1933 with She Done Him Wrong. West co-starred with a young Cary Grant, and she delivered the kind of lines that made censors sweat. When she purred, "Why don't you come up sometime and see me?" audiences roared. The film was bawdy, brassy, and dripping with innuendo, and it saved Paramount from bankruptcy during the Depression. That same year she starred in I'm No Angel, another smash success that paired her with Cary Grant again. This time she played a carnival dancer who claws her way to fame. Once again, Mae West's performance was full of sly jokes, sultry glances, and a self-assured sexuality that America had never seen before on screen. Mae West wasn't the kind of woman Hollywood usually put in front of audiences. She was in her 40s when she became a star, a time when most actresses were told they were too old. But her wit, her curves, and her charisma made her timeless. But Hollywood's freedom didn't last. In 1934, the production code, known as the Hays Code, was enforced. It banned indecent material. No excessive drinking, no sexual innuendo, no disrespect for authority, and certainly no vulgarity. In other words, it was practically written to stop Mae West. The censors went to war with her scripts. Jokes were cut, lines were rewritten, and directors were forced to tone down her performances. Yet, even censored, Mae West could get more innuendo into a single raised eyebrow than most could in a whole script. She famously said, "I believe in censorship. After all, I made a fortune out of it." Still, the pressure was intense. By the late 1930s, her career slowed. But she never disappeared. She reinvented herself on radio in Las Vegas, and later even in rock and roll culture. She became more than an actress. She was a legend. What made Mae West unique was her total refusal to apologize. At a time when actresses were trained to be demure, soft-spoken, and submissive, West was brash, sexual, and openly ambitious. She wasn't just acting. She wrote her own material, controlled her career, and built her image. Critics called her vulgar, indecent, even immoral. But she flipped the insult into her trademark. Audiences adored her because she said the things everyone else was too afraid to. She made sex funny instead of shameful. She made women strong instead of silent. And she made men the punchline instead of the puncher. Her one-liners became immortal. When asked if she liked diamonds, she replied, "I do, because they're so hard to get." When someone told her she was good, she purred, "When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better." Mae West understood what few in Hollywood dared to admit. Vulgarity was simply truth spoken too loudly. And if the truth made people uncomfortable, well, that was their problem. Mae West's influence stretched far beyond her own era. She was a pioneer for women in entertainment, writing her own roles, controlling her image, and turning scandal into power. Later generations of comedians and performers, from Madonna to Lady Gaga, borrowed from her playbook of shock, sexuality, and satire. She lived to be 87, never once toning down her act. Even in her final years, she still appeared in films, wrapped in diamonds, tossing out double entendres as if censorship never existed. Mae West wasn't vulgar in the way her critics claimed. She was bold. She was unapologetic. And she was ahead of her time. By laughing at sin, she made it less scary. By turning scandal into comedy, she changed what Hollywood and America thought a woman could be. So when history calls her vulgar, we should remember what she really was. A trailblazer who made sin funny, and in doing so, made herself unforgettable. If Mae West turned vulgarity into comedy, then Tallulah Bankhead turned it into chaos. Bankhead was not simply an actress. She was a force of nature, a hurricane of sharp wit, scandalous behavior, and fearless living. Born into privilege in Alabama in 1902, the daughter of a powerful Southern political family, Tallulah could have chosen a life of comfort and respectability. Instead, she set her sights on the stage and decided that if she was going to live, she was going to live loudly. Tallulah's career began with fits and starts in the United States, but it was in London during the 1920s that she became a sensation. She moved across the Atlantic to try her hand at British theatre, and her blend of Southern charm, husky voice, and magnetic presence made her stand out immediately. Audiences were entranced by her unconventional style, and critics praised her daring performances. She embraced modern risque plays that reflected the shifting morals of the post-World War I era. Soon, she became a fixture of London society, mingling with aristocrats, artists, and bohemians. While her contemporaries tried to cultivate ladylike reputations, Tallulah smoked cigarettes in public, drank heavily, and delivered outrageous one-liners. But what made Bankhead truly notorious wasn't just her work. It was her personal life. In an age when homosexuality was demonized and careers could be destroyed by whispers of scandal, Tallulah was remarkably open about her bisexuality. She had affairs with both men and women and rarely bothered to hide it. To a journalist who once asked her why she wasn't married, she famously quipped, "I'm as pure as the driven slush." That kind of honesty was both shocking and liberating. She delighted in shocking the press with scandalous remarks. One of her most quoted lines when asked about her love life was, "My father warned me about men and booze, but he never said anything about women and cocaine." Tallulah cultivated an image of reckless decadence. She smoked thousands of cigarettes a year, drank cocktails as if they were water, and partied until dawn. Hollywood gossip columnists relished every outrageous story about her, whether true or exaggerated. She reportedly attended parties wearing nothing but a fur coat, or strolled through hotel lobbies nude under a mink. And unlike other stars who begged for discretion, Tallulah seemed to thrive on the attention. She once said, "The only thing I regret about my past is the length of it. If I had to live my life again, I'd make the same mistakes, only sooner." Yet for all the scandal, Tallulah was also a serious actress. Her most enduring Hollywood role came in 1944 when Alfred Hitchcock cast her in Lifeboat, a tense World War II drama set entirely in a lifeboat adrift at sea. Playing a glamorous journalist trapped with survivors after a U-boat attack, Bankhead delivered a performance that critics praised as her finest on screen. Her presence was commanding, her wit razor-sharp, and her charisma undeniable. She even shocked the crew with her audacity. Famously, during filming, she refused to wear underwear beneath her costumes, which caused trouble for the camera operators. When told this was distracting, she snapped back with her trademark wit, "I don't wear underwear. What do you want me to do, go without?" But as much as audiences loved her, Tallulah terrified polite society. In an era when women were supposed to be demure, she was brash. When they were supposed to keep their private lives hidden, she flaunted hers. She swore openly, she spoke about sex with irreverence, and she treated conventions as if they were meant to be broken. For conservative America, she was the embodiment of vulgarity. And yet, that vulgarity was precisely what made her magnetic. She represented a freedom that many people secretly longed for but dared not pursue. Over time, her hard living took its toll. Alcohol, cigarettes, and reckless habits affected her health and limited the consistency of her career. Still, she never toned down her personality, never pretended to be anything other than herself. In the gay community, she became a beloved figure, remembered not just for her beauty and talent, but for her refusal to hide who she was. Long before the word icon was used so freely, Tallulah Bankhead embodied it. She lived loudly, defiantly, and without apology. Tallulah Bankhead's life was a balancing act between brilliance and so-called bad behavior. She was capable of dazzling artistry, yet she was equally known for the scandals she courted. For some, she was vulgarity personified, a woman too wild, too loud, too unrestrained. But for others, she was something far greater, a symbol of liberation in an era of repression. She lived on her own terms, and in doing so she gave permission, especially to outsiders, rebels, and queer people, to do the same. Bankhead once said, "Nobody can be exactly like me. Sometimes even I have trouble doing it." And perhaps that is the best way to remember her. Not as a saint, not as a sinner, but as someone so entirely herself that she could never be copied. She was Tallulah, the outrageous heiress who scandalized the world and, in the process, became unforgettable. If Mae West made sin funny and Tallulah Bankhead made it outrageous, then Ava Gardner made it intoxicating. She was called the world's most beautiful animal by MGM's publicity machine, a tagline meant to shock, but one that fit the image Hollywood built around her. Yet Ava Gardner was far more than a sultry screen siren. She was a woman who lived her life at full speed, reckless, unapologetic, and untamed. For every glittering film premiere and glamorous magazine cover, there was a headline about her wild romances, her heavy drinking, or her volcanic temper. To her fans, she was intoxicating. To her critics, she was too wild to handle. And that paradox is exactly what made her unforgettable. Ava Lavinia Gardner was born in 1922 in Grabtown, a small tobacco farming community in North Carolina. She was the youngest of 7 children, raised in a strict Baptist family, far from the glitz of Hollywood. By all accounts, she was shy, barefoot, and ordinary, until fate intervened. A photograph of Ava taken by her brother-in-law was placed in the window of his New York photo studio. A passing employee from MGM noticed it and urged her to audition. That snapshot, almost by accident, opened the door to the dream factory. When Ava first arrived in Hollywood, MGM executives were mesmerized by her looks but puzzled by her thick Southern drawl. Early on, she was dubbed untrainable. She was given minor roles, decorative parts with few lines, her beauty doing most of the work. But Ava had something the cameras loved, an earthy sensuality that couldn't be taught. Slowly, she learned the craft, waiting for the role that would transform her from a contract player into a star. That moment came in 1946 with The Killers. Based on an Ernest Hemingway short story, the film cast Ava as Kitty Collins, the femme fatale who lures Burt Lancaster's doomed boxer into a life of crime and betrayal. With her smoldering gaze and velvety voice, Ava stole the movie. Audiences were mesmerized. Overnight, she went from background beauty to Hollywood's hottest new star. The press called her irresistible, and the studio capitalized on her allure, casting her in exotic dramas and high-profile musicals like Showboat and Magambo, the latter earning her an Academy Award nomination. But while her on-screen presence was magnetic, it was her off-screen life that kept her in the headlines. Ava Gardner's romances were legendary, a constant source of gossip. Her first marriage, to Mickey Rooney, was a whirlwind. She was just 19 when she married the teen idol, but the marriage lasted barely a year. Rooney's womanizing and Ava's fiery independence clashed from the start. Next came bandleader Artie Shaw, a man known for his brilliance and his arrogance. He tried to educate Ava, forcing her to read classic literature, belittling her small-town roots. The marriage collapsed within a year, leaving Ava determined never to be molded again. And then there was Frank Sinatra. Their relationship was a storm, passionate, destructive, and headline-grabbing. When they met, Sinatra was married, but the attraction between them was undeniable. Their affair was scandalous, and when Sinatra divorced his wife to marry Ava in 1951, the press went into a frenzy. Their marriage was a tempest of love, jealousy, and violent arguments, fueled by alcohol and fiery temperaments. They broke plates, shouted insults, and reconciled passionately, only to repeat the cycle. Sinatra called Ava the love of his life, and she admitted later that he was hers. But their love was too volatile to last. After years of turbulence, they divorced, though they remained connected for the rest of their lives. Ava's reputation for wild living grew as quickly as her stardom. She drank heavily, partied late into the night, and had no patience for Hollywood hypocrisy. Journalists labeled her reckless, but Ava didn't care. She once said bluntly, "I either write the books or people will write them for me." She cursed freely, fought with lovers, and ignored the expectations of the studio system. MGM tried to control her, but Ava refused to play by the rules. She was too authentic, too untamed. Her temper was as famous as her beauty. She could be charming and magnetic one moment, and explosive the next. Stories circulated of bar fights, drunken escapades, and fiery confrontations with co-stars. Yet, despite the scandals, directors and actors loved working with her because she brought a raw, natural energy to her performances. In films like The Barefoot Contessa, her screen image blurred with her real life. The woman who rises from obscurity to dazzling fame, only to find that beauty and success come with chains. As time went on, Ava distanced herself from Hollywood. Tired of the constant publicity and suffocating studio system, she lived abroad, spending years in Spain and London, seeking anonymity and escape. Her later years were quieter but tinged with the same defiant independence. She continued to act sporadically, appearing in films and television, but her legend had already been sealed. What made Ava Gardner so compelling was the contradiction she embodied. On screen, she was the epitome of glamour. Polished, stunning, untouchable. Off-screen, she was raw, messy, and human. The same traits that the press called vulgar or reckless were the ones that made her real. She wasn't a manufactured starlet. She was herself, flaws and all. And audiences, even as they devoured the gossip about her wild life, loved her for it. Ava Gardner's story is not just one of beauty, but of rebellion. She refused to be controlled, refused to be silenced, and refused to pretend to be perfect. She lived her life with passion, whether it brought her joy or heartbreak. In the end, she became something more than a movie star. She became a myth, a reminder that true glamour isn't about perfection. It's about fire, danger, and the willingness to break every rule. Ava Gardner was all of that and more. She was Hollywood's wild beauty, and she remains one of its most unforgettable legends. If Ava Gardner was remembered for her beauty and excess, Bette Davis was remembered for something far more startling: her honesty. In a Hollywood that demanded women look perfect, behave politely, and always smile for the cameras, Davis was different. She didn't care about being likable. She cared about being real. She smoked too much, argued too loudly, fought with producers, and played characters who weren't soft, sweet, or submissive. For this, the studios and the press often called her vulgar. But what they really meant was that she refused to be silent. Bette Davis was born in 1908 in Lowell, Massachusetts, and from the beginning she was drawn to the stage. She was ambitious, sharp, and determined to break into Hollywood, though executives were skeptical of her. She didn't have the delicate beauty of other starlets. Her eyes were large, her features unconventional, her voice clipped and fierce. But Davis wasn't chasing beauty. She was chasing truth. That truth first stunned audiences in 1934, when she starred in Of Human Bondage. In the film, Davis played Mildred, a cruel, manipulative waitress who toys with a man's affections before meeting a tragic end. It was a role no glamorous actress wanted. Mildred was vulgar, common, and unsympathetic. But Davis seized it with ferocity. She stripped away vanity, caked her face in harsh makeup, and delivered a performance so raw that critics couldn't ignore her. Overnight, she went from just another Warner Brothers contract player to one of Hollywood's most respected actresses. But Davis wasn't satisfied with respect. She wanted freedom. Under the studio system, actors were bound to long-term contracts, forced into roles they didn't want, their careers tightly controlled by executives. Bette Davis hated being told what to do. When Warner Brothers tried to relegate her to formulaic melodramas, she rebelled. In 1936, she broke her contract and fled to England, determined to work on more meaningful projects. The studio sued her, and though she lost the legal battle, she won something greater: an image as a fighter, a woman unwilling to be tamed. From then on, Warner Brothers had to take her seriously. Her career soared in the late 1930s and 1940s. With films like Jezebel, Dark Victory, and now Voyager, she established herself as a powerhouse, unafraid to play flawed, difficult women. She won 2 Academy Awards and became the first woman to be president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. But with her success came a reputation. Davis was outspoken, demanding, and often clashed with producers, directors, and co-stars. She wasn't willing to flatter egos or play nice. To many in Hollywood, that made her vulgar. To audiences, it made her unforgettable. And then came the feud. Bette Davis's rivalry with Joan Crawford became legendary, a saga of clashing egos that captured Hollywood gossip for decades. The two despised each other, and they didn't hide it. Davis called Crawford a rotten actress, while Crawford mocked Davis's appearance. Their hostility came to a head during the filming of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. In 1962, a gothic thriller that cast them as 2 faded sisters locked in a war of jealousy and resentment. The tension between them was real, fueling their performances and turning the film into a box office sensation. Hollywood had never seen anything like it. 2 aging actresses, once glamorous, now tearing each other apart on screen and off. The feud was vulgar, messy, and delicious, and it made history. But Davis's bluntness extended far beyond her battles with Crawford. She was known for insulting producers to their faces, calling out poor scripts, and refusing to compromise on her craft. She fought against ageism, demanding strong roles well into her 50s and 60s, when most actresses were discarded by the industry. She had no patience for pretense. When asked late in life about her reputation, she simply shrugged and said, "I survived because I was tougher than anybody else." For Bette Davis, vulgarity wasn't about sex or scandal. It was about refusing to play the polite game. It was about saying what she thought, even if it wasn't ladylike. She smoked on screen when women were supposed to look dainty. She yelled when women were supposed to stay quiet. She played cruel, selfish, broken characters when Hollywood wanted women to be angels. She ripped the mask off glamour and showed audiences something much more human. Her legacy is immense. She starred in over 100 films, won countless awards, and is remembered as one of the greatest actresses in cinema history. But perhaps her greatest contribution was in redefining what it meant to be a woman in Hollywood. She proved that you didn't have to be soft, sweet, or submissive to succeed. You could be sharp, difficult, even vulgar, and still be brilliant. Bette Davis once famously said, "When a man gives his opinion, he's a man. When a woman gives hers, she's a bitch." She knew better than anyone the price of honesty in a world that demanded female silence. But she also knew its power. In the end, Davis made honesty her weapon, her brand, her legacy. She turned vulgarity into truth-telling, and in doing so, she carved her name into Hollywood history. Few stars embodied both scandal and sophistication the way Marlene Dietrich did. She was not simply an actress or a singer. She was an enigma. With her smoky voice, sultry presence, and unmistakable style, Dietrich could silence a room with a single glance. But what made her truly revolutionary was her refusal to conform. She didn't just bend the rules of femininity. She shattered them, striding into the spotlight in trousers, tuxedos, and men's hats, at a time when women were expected to be fragile, feminine, and modest. To Hollywood's gatekeepers, this made her vulgar. To her fans, it made her unforgettable. Marlene Dietrich's story began in Berlin, where she studied music and acting before finding her breakthrough in 1930 with the film The Blue Angel. Playing the cabaret singer Lola Lola, she became the very image of decadent European allure, a woman who used her sexuality like a weapon, manipulating men with a smirk and a song. The role made her an international star, and Hollywood quickly beckoned. She signed with Paramount Pictures and made her American debut in Morocco, 1930, where she performed in a tuxedo, kissed a woman on the lips, and instantly set the standard for cinematic provocation. Audiences gasped, Censors panicked, but Marlene Dietrich became a sensation. What made Dietrich different was not just her beauty but her androgyny. She was a master of reinvention, slipping effortlessly between feminine gowns and masculine suits, seducing audiences by defying their expectations. At a time when cross-dressing was scandalous and even illegal in parts of the United States, Dietrich wore trousers in public as casually as she wore silk gowns. She was bisexual, and while she never made public declarations, her love affairs with both men and women were an open secret in Hollywood. To some, this made her vulgar, an embodiment of old-world decadence in a puritanical industry. But to others, she was a beacon of freedom, daring to live authentically when so few dared. Her career flourished throughout the 1930s, with hits like Shanghai Express and Desire, where she combined glamour with a cool, almost untouchable presence. She wasn't the wholesome American sweetheart. She was exotic, mysterious, and slightly dangerous. Critics accused her of being too European, too decadent, too vulgar, but this only added to her mystique. Dietrich understood something few actresses did. That scandal could be power. Every time censors complained about her outfits or her behavior, audiences only became more intrigued. But while her screen persona was scandalous, her real-life choices were even bolder. During World War II, Dietrich risked her career and her life by openly opposing the Nazis. She became an American citizen in 1939 and used her fame to rally support against Hitler's regime. She performed tirelessly for Allied troops, traveling to dangerous front lines with the USO, enduring exhausting tours, harsh conditions, and personal risk. She sang to soldiers in muddy fields and war-torn towns, often refusing safer assignments because she wanted to be where the men needed her most. For this, she received medals from the United States and France, including the Medal of Freedom and the Legion of Honor. The vulgar cabaret star became a war hero. Still, Dietrich's contradictions made her endlessly fascinating. She was glamorous yet subversive, aloof yet compassionate, scandalous yet patriotic. Even after the war, she continued to reinvent herself. When her film career slowed, she became a celebrated stage performer, dazzling audiences in cabarets and concert halls around the world. Her signature look, fishnet stockings, shimmering gowns, and of course the tuxedo became iconic. Younger artists admired her for her boldness. She influenced everyone from Madonna to David Bowie, who adopted her fluid approach to gender and performance. Dietrich's reputation as vulgar slowly transformed over time. What once shocked polite society came to be celebrated as avant-garde. Her tuxedo, once a scandal, became a symbol of liberation. Her bisexuality, once whispered about, made her a queer icon decades before the LGBTQ+ movement found mainstream acceptance. Her European decadence, once criticized, became part of her mystique, elevating her to near-mythic status. She lived unapologetically, and in doing so, she rewrote the rules of femininity, sexuality, and celebrity. Even in her later years, as she withdrew from public life, Dietrich remained a figure of intrigue. She lived in near seclusion in Paris, rarely making appearances, but her legend only grew. Photographers, designers, and performers continued to cite her as a muse. She died in 1992, but by then she was more than a star. She was an icon, someone who had transcended the screen to become a symbol of defiance, glamour, and freedom. Marlene Dietrich proved that what society calls vulgar often hides a deeper truth: fear of the unconventional. Her tuxedos, her kisses, her bold defiance of gender norms, these weren't vulgarities at all, but acts of courage. She showed the world that a woman could be strong, seductive, and unapologetically herself, without needing to fit into the narrow boxes of Hollywood respectability. That is why, long after her films have faded from memory, the image of Marlene Dietrich in a tuxedo endures. A timeless reminder that sometimes, the most scandalous thing a woman can do is to be free. When we look back at Hollywood's golden age, we tend to remember the glitz, the glamour, and the carefully polished illusion of perfection. Studios wanted their stars to be untouchable, like living gods on the silver screen. But behind the shimmering lights, there were women who refused to play that part. Women who embraced their flaws, their desires, and their voices, even when the world branded them vulgar. Mae West made audiences laugh at what others tried to hide. She turned sex into comedy, winked at the censors, and transformed scandal into stardom. To her critics, she was indecent. To her fans, she was liberating. Tallulah Bankhead shocked society with her outspokenness, her sexuality, and her appetite for life. She didn't care if she was called outrageous, because her very presence dared others to live honestly. Ava Gardner embodied both beauty and chaos, proving that glamour could coexist with recklessness. She loved fiercely, fought fiercely, and never apologized for being more than just a pretty face. Bette Davis, with her raw performances and her sharp tongue, redefined what it meant to be a leading lady. She was not content to be ornamental. She wanted to be powerful, even if it meant feuding with studios, rivals, and directors. She showed that honesty itself could be seen as vulgar in a world built on lies. And Marlene Dietrich, with her tuxedos and smoky voice, turned scandal into artistry. She was the embodiment of seduction and rebellion, living proof that gender, sexuality, and style could never be confined to polite society's narrow definitions. Each of these women was accused of being vulgar because they rejected the cage built for them. They didn't smile politely when told to be quiet. They didn't sit still when ordered to behave. They weren't afraid to drink, to smoke, to love who they wanted, or to play characters that revealed uncomfortable truths. What society called vulgar was, in reality, freedom. Vulgarity, in its purest form, is simply the act of refusing to conform. It is the refusal to dress, act, or love the way others demand. And in that refusal, these women carved out their legacies. They paved the way for today's stars who flaunt their individuality on red carpets, who speak openly about their identities, who refuse to be silenced when they are told to be ladylike. Without Mae West's sexual bravado, there would be no Madonna. Without Tallulah Bankhead's wild defiance, there would be no Lady Gaga. Without Ava Gardner's dangerous glamour, there would be no Angelina Jolie. Without Bette Davis's sharp honesty, there would be no Meryl Streep. And without Marlene Dietrich's fearless androgyny, there would be no David Bowie, no Prince, no modern icons of gender fluidity. These women didn't just change Hollywood. They changed culture itself. But perhaps the most powerful part of their story is the reminder that labels are temporary. In their own lifetimes, these actresses were mocked, censored, and dismissed as vulgar. But today they are remembered as pioneers. Their so-called vulgarity became their strength, their scandal became their legend, and their refusal to conform became the blueprint for generations of women to follow. So the next time you hear the word vulgar, remember this: it is often just a weapon used against those who dare to live freely. Against women who refuse to shrink themselves to fit inside someone else's idea of respectability. Against artists who speak truths society isn't ready to hear. What once was vulgar becomes, in time, visionary. Mae West, Tallulah Bankhead, Ava Gardner, Bette Davis, Marlene Dietrich. These were not vulgar women. They were simply ahead of their time. And that is why their names still shimmer today, long after the lights of the Golden Age have dimmed.